Okay, so this video will talk you through the analysis of As Imperceptibly as Grief by Emily Dickinson. So at this stage, you'll need your green poetry anthology or a copy of the poem if you don't have your anthology with you. Okay, so step one then, you always need to read the poem through, and we do recommend that you read the poem through 2 or 3 times to make sure that you familiarise yourself and have a good understanding of the language within the poem. As imperceptibly as grief. As imperceptibly as grief, the summer lapsed away. Too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy. A quietness distilled as twilight long begun, or nature spending with herself sequestered afternoon. The dusk drew earlier in, the morning foreign shone, a courteous yet harrowing grace, as guest that would be gone, and thus, without a wing or service of a keel, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. Okay, so if you haven't already, make sure you've set your page up as shown on the video. So you need 3 boxes at the bottom of the page drawn with a ruler with the titles Summary, Context, Structure and Form. That brings us on to step 2, where you need to bullet point the contextual information on the slide. So Emily Dickinson was an American poet. She rarely left her house for 30 to 40 years, and she also rarely had visitors or contact with other people. It can be assumed that she was agoraphobic, so she had a fear of the outside world, hence her decision to stay in her house for all of those years. And as a result of that, she became almost an observer of the outside world rather than being involved in it. Her poetry explores how her emotions are attached and projected onto the environment. And she's also known for writing often about quite dark concepts, about unknown concepts such as death. Remember to pause the video and make notes if the video moves a bit too quickly. Okay, so step 3 is the summary of the poem. So once again, bullet point the information so that you've got an outline of the story or the journey of the poem. So firstly, and I would define this somewhere on your page, imperceptibly means unnoticeable or the gradual changing of something. The poem is a melancholic or sad poem that uses the departure of summer to symbolise the departure of emotions and the distress that can bring with that. The speaker in the poem is concerned by the end of the season of summer, and she's concerned with having to start the new season. And again, that's symbolic of her having to deal with the change of emotions. Grief is associated with change and transition and the nostalgia that comes with leaving the past behind. Ultimately, the speaker doesn't want to let go of the past. Step 4 then, so we'll work through the poem and we'll pick out key lines and make our notes of analysis. The first line then, as imperceptibly as grief, that is a simile. And the opening simile and repetition of the title draws comparisons between the slow, subtle transition of seasons to the stages of grief. So just like how grief changes and goes on a journey, so does the changing of the seasons. So it's almost unnoticeable. However, you'll notice that summer has been personified in summer lapsed away, and that almost creates the image of our speaker feeling quite betrayed or hurt, that summer is moving on. It's like she feels left behind. The hyphen you'll see is an end stopped line, and that shows again her resistance to summer leaving her. So the speaker wants the beauty of summer to stay. Too imperceptible at last to seem like perfidy. So that noun perfidy means being deceitful or untrustworthy. It's quite a negative word. She acknowledges that summer is not leaving to upset her. Instead, she identifies that change is inevitable. So she's saying that the transition of summer is too gradual for it to be a really negative personal thing. She acknowledges that the season has to change. So she doesn't feel like it's an act of being untrustworthy. It's natural. Okay, so moving on with our analysis then. A quietness distilled, we've got some nice sensory language there, and that image shows the pureness of the growing quietness. So obviously, once something moves on, once change is taking place and something is going in a new direction, there will be quietness left behind. So it's like the sound of summer leaving. It's leaving a quiet behind. We have the image of nature spending with herself, sequestered afternoon. So again, we've got the personification here of nature, showing that the speaker understands the need for summer to rest. So the speaker sees summer as a human concept, but she identifies that summer itself needs to take time away. It's kind of done its job, and now it needs to go and rest. So the speaker acknowledges that, and therefore she is accepting of the loss. She understands the need for summer to isolate. So the poem continues then, the dusk drew earlier in. So dusk, do make a note, is reference to the evening. So the image here is the fact that the nights are becoming longer. So we've got the comparative there earlier. If the evening is occurring earlier, obviously the nights are much longer. So we've got more of an image of darkness here because summer obviously is no longer here. So the speaker therefore feels a sense of sadness that the beauty of the light is becoming less and less. So she has less light in her life because the evening has drew earlier in. You can also see that in the morning foreign shone. So again, that sense of sunshine in the morning is described there as being foreign, which again creates that sense of distance or separation. She describes a courteous yet harrowing grace. So we've got this juxtaposition here of the words courteous and harrowing. You know, courteous is a more positive word, and then harrowing obviously is much more negative, much darker. So the juxtaposition here shows the complexity of grief. It creates a dark, quite ominous tone, symbolising her reluctance for the summer to leave her. She's feeling a mixture of emotions, if you like, because although she's hurt by the departure of summer, she also again understands that it has to move on. Finally then, to conclude the poem, and thus without a wing or service of a keel. So we've got these concrete nouns, wing and keel, and do make a note of the definition that they relate to the structure of a ship. So this image, this metaphorical image, can relate to the fact that summer needs no assistance in its departure. it will leave in its own accord. So that kind of shows how powerful and how strong summer is, because it knows that it needs to go and it doesn't need any help in departing. But it also highlights how natural and how expected the change is. So think of summer as this ship that is naturally making its journey away. And then the final lines of the poem then, our summer made her light escape into the beautiful. So we've got this enjambment here, which is where the line runs on to the next line without a break. And Dickinson concludes the poem by personifying the summer again. The enjambment shows the gentle and gradual loss of the season, and she acknowledges its beauty and understands the inevitability of loss. These final lines to the poem are not negative. There is not a profound sense of resentment. Instead, if you look at that final word, beautiful, the poem ends in quite an accepting way. And that's important to understand. The speaker, yes, feels sad. And you can see that in the collective our summer, because she feels like summer is part of her. But she acknowledges that summer is escaping into the beautiful, into a much more beautiful or positive place. So the poem ends with that acceptance. Step 5 then, so in your third box on your page, you need to make notes for the structure and form of the poem. So we saw lots of hyphens in the poem, and the ongoing use of these end-stopped lines shows her resistance to let go of the past or of summer. We also see quite a lot of enjambment in the poem, and again that shows the attempts of the season and her emotions to leave and change. So it shows that journey, that transition through the movement of the enjambment. And the closing line into the beautiful through the enjambment physically demonstrates the season's escape. So the enjambment of the final line shows again her escape as she's almost escaping through the poem, escaping into a different time. So that concludes the analysis of Emily Dickinson's As Imperceptibly as Grief. Again, feel free to go back and pause the video at key moments if you need to add to your notes, but hopefully you've got a good understanding now of that poem.